The salt air, thick and heavy, clung to my lungs like a shroud. It was the smell of endings, of journeys that had run their course, and for me it was a familiar perfume. I stood on the deck of the sea Serpent, a hulking beast of steel groaning under the weight of its cargo 3 days out from port. The moon, a sliver of bone in the ink-black sky, offered little illumination, just enough to cast long, distorted shadows that danced with the swell of the ocean. 3 days. That's how long it had been since the call. 3 days since a ghost from my past had decided to reanimate itself, not in the shadows of the city streets I'd abandoned, but out here, adrift on the indifferent sea. My hands, calloused and scarred, felt the rough grain of the railing. They remembered other railings, other nights, other failures. A colleague, his face etched with a weariness that mirrored my own, had found me. Not in the grimy bar I'd taken to frequenting, nor in the cramped apartment that smelled perpetually of stale coffee and regret. He'd found me on a pier watching the ships as if I were waiting for one to carry me away from myself. "Cole," he'd said, his voice low, barely cutting through the mournful cry of a distant foghorn. "They hit the warehouse on Pier 7. My gut had twisted, a familiar, unwelcome clench. Pier 7, it was too close, too deliberate. "The usual," he'd continued, his gaze fixed on the dark water. "Clean, no witnesses, nothing left but echoes." Echoes, that was the word. Now I was here on this god-forsaken ship, the Sea Serpent, in its stifling cargo hold. The air was thick with the metallic tang of machinery and the faint, cloying sweetness of something I couldn't quite place. Dim emergency lights cast a sickly yellow glow, illuminating stacks of crates that rose like silent, imposing monoliths. The only sound was the rhythmic thrum of the ship's engines, a heartbeat in the vast emptiness. The colleague had been right. It was too clean, too precise. The pattern, it was too deliberate, too artistic. The thief hadn't just taken what they wanted, they'd left a signature. A signature I knew all too well, the way they'd bypassed every alarm, every lock, leaving behind only a meticulous absence. This heist, however, was different. It wasn't just the method, it was the target. Carrying what? The colleague hadn't been forthcoming, a common courtesy amongst those who'd seen the wreckage of my career. He'd simply said, "It's important, Cole, and it matches." Matches. The word hung in the humid air, heavy with implication. I knelt, my knees protesting, and examined the floor more closely. The grease smear wasn't random. God, I understood. A shiver, unrelated to the ambient temperature, traced its way up my spine. This wasn't just a copycat. This was a performance. A taunt. Someone was playing a game, and they were using my past, my failure, as the board. I stood, my gaze sweeping the cavernous space. The crates were enormous, some emblazoned with foreign markings, others simply marked with cryptic symbols. What were they carrying, and why would someone go to such lengths to acquire it from a vessel 3 days from land? The colleague had been vague about the exact nature of the stolen goods, only that they were of immense value and sensitive. Sensitive enough to warrant a meticulously planned operation that mimicked the work of a phantom. I moved deeper into the hold, my footsteps echoing unnervingly. I found another mark, this one a faint scratch on the metal casing of a ventilation shaft. It was a perfect, almost impossibly thin line, exactly the width of a specialized cutting tool. The same tool the phantom had favored. My breath hitched. This wasn't just a resemblance. This was a direct imitation, a challenge. I'd been so close so many times, and then I'd broken. The case had broken me. Now it seemed the phantom had returned, or perhaps a student had surpassed the master, and then I saw it. On the steel plating of the bulkhead, etched with startling clarity, was the symbol. A stylized raven, wings outstretched, its beak curved in a silent scream. The phantom's mark. My heart, a traitorous organ. Constricted, it wasn't just an echo. It was a direct communication, a message sent across the years, across the vast, indifferent ocean, straight to me. The tension in the air was no longer just a feeling. It was a palpable force, pressing in on me from all sides. This wasn't a case I'd been asked to solve. This was a reckoning. And I was already at sea with nowhere left to run. The game had begun again, and this time the stakes were far higher than just catching a criminal. This time it was about reclaiming whatever pieces of myself I had left. The words still echoed in the cavernous space, a phantom whisper against the groaning metal of the vessel. Matches, not the kind I strike against a rough surface, but the kind that line up, that fit together with chilling precision. It wasn't just random spillage from some careless dock worker. It was deliberate. A trail. My fingers traced the outline of the smear, the grit of it clinging to my skin like a second, unwelcome layer. Each inch I followed felt like a step deeper into a mire I'd sworn to leave behind. The air here was thick, a cloying blend of brine, diesel, and something else. Something metallic and sharp, like ozone before a storm. I pushed myself to my feet, my joints cracking a protest. The light from my handheld lamp danced, a frantic, desperate thing, across the stacked crates and coiled ropes. This was it then. He was a craftsman of chaos, a sculptor of fear, and his signature, subtle as it was unmistakable. I moved deeper into the hold, the beam of my lamp cutting through the gloom. The silence was a heavy blanket, broken only by the rhythmic thrum of the ship's engines and the distant cry of a gull, a mournful sentinel in the night. The crates were of various sizes, some bearing the faded stamps of international shipping lines, others unmarked. What had they been after? This wasn't a smash-and grab. The meticulous nature of the grease trail, the careful avoidance of disturbance beyond the target. It spoke of planning, of expertise. My gaze fell upon a section of the deck, a small cleared area near a ventilation shaft. A faint scuff mark marred the otherwise pristine surface, and then I saw it, a tiny glint of metal almost lost in the grime. I knelt again, my breath catching. It was a fragment no larger than my thumbnail of a specialized tool, not something I'd find in a common toolbox. This was the stuff of precision engineering, of intricate mechanisms. The same kind of tool that had been used in the other incidents. The incidents that had driven me from the force, that had left me with nothing but the gnawing emptiness of failure. A sudden creak from above made me freeze. My lamp snapped upwards, its beam sweeping across the metal superstructure. Nothing. Just the ship's own symphony of groans and sighs, but the feeling of being watched, of not being alone, prickled at the back of my neck. This place, 3 days out from any port, was a closed system. Whoever had been here, whoever had left that trail, was still aboard or had been. I straightened, the fragment of metal cool and smooth against my fingertips. The detective had called it a botched job. He was wrong. This was the opening act, a prelude to something far more devastating. I pocketed the fragment, a heavy, tangible piece of the puzzle. My gut churned. I was supposed to be out of this life. Retired. A ghost in my own story. But the ghost of the killer, the one I'd never caught, had found me, and he was calling me back. This wasn't just about a few stolen goods or a broken lock. This was about a debt that needed to be paid, a wrong that needed to be righted, and if the official channels weren't going to see it, then I would. For better or worse, Cole was back on the case. The tension in the air was no longer just the humidity. It was the coiled spring of a hunt that had just begun. The tang of brine and something metallic, like old blood, clung to the air in the cargo ship hold, 3 days from port. It was a smell that burrowed into my lungs, a constant reminder of where I was and why. The detective, a hawk with sharp eyes and sharper questions, had already gone. He'd left behind a silence that felt heavier than the stacked crates, a silence punctuated only by the ship's mournful groans. He'd looked at me, really looked, the way I look at a broken thing I ran not sure I can fix. "This is your territory, Cole," he'd said, his voice low, a rumble against the thrum of the engines. "You know these waters." He didn't know, not really. I knew the shadows, the underbelly, the places where decency went to die, but this was different. This was the echo of a ghost I'd tried to bury, a phantom limb I kept expecting to ache. The word. Matches, it still played in my head. A broken record. The grease smear on the container, not just a smear, but a deliberate mark, like a signature. I ran a gloved finger over the rough grain of the wooden crate, a faint outline of what looked like a symbol imprinted beneath the grime. A circle bisected by a single line. It was too deliberate, too clean for a random act. This wasn't just a theft, it was a statement. 3 days from port. The thought coiled in my gut. Whoever was doing this was bold, audacious. They were using the vastness of the ocean, the anonymity of transit, as their canvas. And they were using his methods. A colleague, a younger man with a nervous tick in his left eye, had called me hours ago. His voice, usually a steady drone of reports and case files, had been tight, strained. "Cole, another one, big one this time, the National Gallery." My breath hitched. The National Gallery, that wasn't a pawn shop or a back alley deal. That was a statement that would reverberate. "They took the Serpent's eye diamond," he'd continued, his words tumbling out like stones. "And the Star of Orion necklace, gone, clean, no alarms tripped, no witnesses, security footage, wiped like they were never there. The Serpent's eye and the Star of Orion, a cascade of sapphires that had graced the necks of queens. This wasn't about petty cash. This was about legacy, about power. I'd seen the patterns before, the escalating boldness. The first hit, a minor artifact from a private collection. The second, the jewels from that seaside villa. And now the crown jewels of the art world, stolen from under the noses of the city's finest. The detective had been right about one thing. This was my territory. The underworld was a language I understood, even if I'd sworn off speaking it. But this new dialect, this twisted echo of a past I couldn't escape, it was speaking directly to me. They would be looking for answers. They would be looking for someone to blame, someone to point a finger at. And with my history, my notoriety, they would inevitably find me. The thought of the detective, the one who'd questioned me on the ship, his eyes holding a mixture of suspicion and a flicker of something akin to pity, made my jaw clench. He thought he was using me, leveraging my knowledge of the criminal element. He didn't understand. He couldn't. This wasn't just a case for me. It was a reckoning. The commissioner wants to know. He wants to know if I have any leads. I closed my eyes, the image of the symbol on the crate flashing behind my lids, a circle bisected by a line, a perfect match. The stakes had risen not just for the city, but for me. The past wasn't just haunting me, it was actively trying to drag me back into its suffocating embrace. And this time I wasn't sure I could find my way out. The Serpent's eye and the Star of Orion, a testament to a mind I knew all too well, a mind I'd failed to cage. The wind howled, a mournful dirge for what was lost and what was yet to come. The air in the cargo ship hold 3 days from port was thick, a cloying blend of salt spray and stale oil. Each breath felt like swallowing a fistful of grit. My flashlight beam, a nervous tremor in my hand, danced across mountains of crates, their stenciled labels a blurry testament to a world I no longer belonged to. But then a glint, a small metallic sheen near a seam on a weathered wooden box. My pulse quickened. I knelt, the rough floor biting through my worn jeans. It was the symbol, faint, almost invisible, etched with a precision that sent a shiver down my spine. The circle bisected by a line, the same mark left at each scene, a signature scrawled in the ashes of my past. It wasn't just a copycat. This was him, or someone who knew him intimately. The implications settled like a shroud, heavy and suffocating. I traced the symbol with a calloused fingertip. It felt cold, alien. The crates surrounding it were marked with destinations I'd never heard of, obscure ports in forgotten corners of the globe. Yet the stolen goods from the recent heists weren't destined for such places. They were the kind of items that ended up on the black market, easily fenced. Unless the final destination wasn't the point. My gaze swept over the stacked cargo, each piece a silent, inanimate witness. I began to work, my movements economical, born of years spent sifting through wreckage. I pried open a crate marked with a faded Scandinavian flag. Inside, nestled amongst coils of thick rope, were stacks of what looked like antique navigational charts, not the kind you'd find on a modern vessel. These were hand-drawn, parchment yellowed with age, depicting coastlines long since reshaped by time and tide. I carefully extracted one, unfurling it. The intricate detail, the archaic symbols, the sheer artistry of it. This was no ordinary cargo. Another crate, this one bearing the insignia of a defunct shipping company, yielded a collection of delicate, hand-blown glass vials. Empty, but each stoppered with a stopper of what appeared to be polished bone. They felt unnervingly fragile, yet held a strange weight. What were they meant to contain? I remembered the reports from the original disappearances, the hushed whispers of strange alchemical substances. I dismissed them then as the ramblings of a terrified populace, fueled by sensationalist news. Its surface was inlaid with mother-of-pearl, forming a swirling, celestial pattern. When I cautiously wound the tiny key, a melody, melancholic and haunting, filled the vast space. It was a tune I vaguely recognized, a lullaby from my childhood, one my mother used to hum. A knot of unease tightened in my gut. This was getting too personal. I continued my grim inventory. Each discovery was a piece of a puzzle that refused to form a coherent picture. Delicate surgical instruments, far too precise for any field medicine, and then a small velvet-lined box. Inside, nestled on faded silk, was a single tarnished silver locket. I opened it. A miniature portrait, faded but still discernible, of a woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. A woman I had loved. My breath hitched. This wasn't random. This was a carefully curated collection, a macabre museum of objects that held a profound, unspoken significance. And the inclusion of the locket, it was a deliberate provocation. A taunt. He knew I was here. He wanted me to see this. My mind raced, sifting through the debris of forgotten files, the ghosts of suspects long since cleared or vanished. The pattern. It wasn't about the monetary value of the stolen goods. It was about the meaning. The navigational charts, the vials, the music box, the texts, the instruments, and now the locket. A thread that led directly back to the case that had broken me, the one I'd sworn to bury with my career. The detective who'd worked the original investigation, a man whose face I could no longer clearly recall, had theorized the killer was driven by a twisted sense of preservation, collecting artifacts that represented lost beauty, lost innocence, lost love. I had scoffed, clinging to logic, to tangible evidence. But here in the belly of this ship, surrounded by the tangible evidence of a resurrected nightmare, his theories felt less like madness and more like prophecy. The symbol, the locket, the stolen items, it all coalesced into a single, terrifying understanding. He wasn't just recreating the past, he was completing it. And the next step, I feared, would be the final, devastating act. It was a live wire humming with the promise of an imminent, terrible discharge. I had to move and fast before the storm broke. The cargo ship hold 3 days from port was a cathedral of shadows, each towering stack of goods a stained glass window to a forgotten journey. My boots echoed on the metal deck, a solitary drumbeat against the groaning hull. I'd followed the whispers, the coded messages passed through anonymous hands to this hulking beast of steel adrift on a restless sea. They said he'd be here, the one who'd slipped through my fingers once before, the architect of the nightmares that still clawed at my sleep. My flashlight beam, a pale, searching finger, snagged on a length of coiled rope, thick as my wrist. It was tied with a knot I knew too well a sailor's hitch, but with a subtle, almost imperceptible alteration. A flourish, his flourish. A signature etched into the mundane. My breath hitched. It wasn't just a hunch anymore. I moved deeper, the air growing heavier, the smell of brine mixing with something else. Something acrid like old sweat and desperation. A single bare bulb flickered overhead, casting a sickly yellow glow that warped the edges of reality. Then I saw him, leaning against a stack of burlap sacks, a silhouette against the dim light. He was smaller than I remembered, his shoulders stooped, but the way he held himself, the stillness was unmistakable. He didn't turn, didn't acknowledge my presence until I was close enough to feel the heat radiating from him, a low hum of contained energy. "Cole," he said, his voice a dry rasp like sand skittering across glass. He finally turned and the light caught his face. Gaunt, etched with lines that spoke of sleepless nights and hard choices. His eyes, though, were sharp, too sharp, like chips of obsidian. "You knew I'd come," I stated, my voice surprisingly steady, a calm surface over a churning sea. A slow smile spread across his lips, a fleeting thing that didn't reach his eyes. "You always do, like a moth to a flame, isn't that what they say?" He gestured with a long, bony finger towards a tarnished metal drum. "Care for a drink? It's been a long journey." I ignored the offer, my gaze sweeping the area. No escape routes visible. "Where are they?" He tilted his head. "Where are what, detective? The treasures of the East, the secrets of the deep?" He chuckled, a sound devoid of mirth. "The next targets, the next lives you're going to shatter." The words were sharp, honed by years of regret. "You think I'm still playing those games, that I'm still the man you chased through the labyrinth of this city?" "You're still the man who leaves his mark," I countered, my eyes fixed on the faint scar that traced a jagged line above his left eyebrow, a scar I'd put there myself, or so I'd thought. He reached up, his fingers tracing the scar. "A reminder," he murmured, "of a promise broken. You think this is about the past, Cole? You're looking at the wrong ghosts." Suddenly, the air shifted. The low hum I'd sensed intensified, not from him, but from around him. A subtle vibration that seeped into the metal beneath my feet. My instinct screamed. This wasn't a one-on-one confrontation. Not one, not two, but a half dozen. They moved with a silent, practiced efficiency, their faces obscured by the gloom, their intentions a palpable threat. They weren't the street thugs I'd sometimes dealt with. These were trained, precise. The man I'd cornered, the one I'd called the architect, simply watched, a detached observer of the unfolding scene. He hadn't been the bait, he'd been the distraction. "Ah," he said, his voice laced with a weary amusement. "It seems my associates have arrived. There." I hadn't anticipated this. I'd walked into a trap, a carefully laid snare designed to reel me in. My hand instinctively went to the worn leather of my jacket, searching for the weight that wasn't there. My service weapon was long gone, a casualty of my disgrace. "You played me," I growled, the words tasting like ash. I was surrounded, my back against a wall of crates, the vast, indifferent ocean a mere few feet away. The stench of oil and salt suddenly felt suffocating. This wasn't the confrontation I'd prepared for. This was a dismantling. A glint of metal caught my eye. One of them held something more than just a knife. My blood, which had been a steady thrum, now felt like ice water. I was exposed, unarmed, and utterly outmatched. The carefully constructed plan, the hope of reclaiming a piece of my shattered reputation, crumbled like dry earth. This was more than a setback. It was a brutal, unforgiving reminder of how far I had fallen. The glint of metal was the last thing I saw before the world dissolved into a sharp, blinding pain. It bloomed behind my eyes, a sudden supernova of agony, and then nothing. When consciousness clawed its way back, it was a slow, agonizing ascent. My head throbbed, a dull, persistent drumbeat against my skull. The air tasted of brine and something metallic like old blood. I blinked, my vision swimming, the dim light of the cargo ship hold 3 days from port, resolving into a hazy tableau of stacked crates and shadowed corners. My limbs felt heavy, sluggish, like they were still submerged in the black water. My hands, I found, were bound behind me with rough rope, biting into my wrists. The rough jute scraped against my skin with every shift of my weight. The floor beneath me was cold, damp concrete. I pushed myself up, a groan escaping my lips, the sound swallowed by the cavernous space. The figures were gone, vanished as if they'd been phantoms conjured by the night. But they had been real. The throbbing in my head was a testament to that. My gaze swept across the hold, searching for any sign of my captors, any clue they might have left behind. Nothing. Just the silent, hulking cargo waiting to be delivered. My mind, however, refused to be stilled by the physical trauma. It raced, replaying the scene, dissecting every movement, every glint of steel. They hadn't wanted to kill me, not yet. A memory surfaced, sharp and unwelcome. The way they moved, the efficiency, the almost surgical precision. It was a dance I knew too well. I tested the ropes, pulling and twisting, but they held firm. My fingers, clumsy and numb, fumbled for anything that might offer purchase. Then my eyes landed on a loose shard of metal near my foot, a jagged piece of what looked like a broken tool. With painstaking effort, I managed to shift my body, bringing my bound hands within reach. The rough edge of the metal scraped against the rope, a slow, agonizing grind. Each tiny abrasion was a victory, a step closer to freedom. The motive gnawed at me. These weren't random thugs, the precision, the planning. It echoed the meticulous nature of the killings I'd failed to stop. But the targets were different now, not individuals, but goods, valuable, untraceable, easily fenced. What was the connection? The stolen artifacts. The ones I'd been investigating before this whole mess began. They weren't just random antiquities. They were items with specific provenance, items that spoke of a particular kind of knowledge. And the serial killer, the one I'd hunted, had been obsessed with history, with ancient rituals, with the forgotten stories of the past. Could it be the same person, or someone who had learned from them? The rope finally gave way, fraying and snapping. I flexed my aching wrists, the circulation returning with a pins and needles fire. I stood, my legs wobbly, and began to move, my steps silent on the concrete floor. I needed to find out what was in this hold, what they were so desperate to protect or to steal. I moved from crate to crate, my eyes scanning the stenciled labels. Electronics, textiles, machinery parts, nothing out of the ordinary, nothing that screamed ancient artifact. Then I saw it, a single unmarked crate tucked away in a far corner, almost an afterthought. A faint, earthy scent wafted from it, something like dry leaves and distant rain. My heart hammered a new rhythm against my ribs. This was it. I ran my fingers over the smooth, unvarnished wood. There was no lock, only a simple latch. My hands, still trembling, reached for it. As I lifted the lid, a faint, ethereal glow emanated from within. It wasn't light, not exactly, but a luminescence that seemed to pulse with an inner life. It was a pendant, intricately carved from what appeared to be obsidian. Strange, angular symbols adorned its surface, symbols I'd seen before, scrawled in the margins of the serial killer's journals, whispered in the fragmented testimonies of his victims. This was no mere theft. This was a retrieval, and they were still out there, playing a game I thought I had ended. They weren't just mirroring the past, they were resurrecting it, and I was caught in its resurgence. The brine bit at my lungs, a phantom ache where breath should have been. My eyelids fluttered, heavy as lead weights. The reek of stale oil and something metallic, something wrong, filled the air. I tested my limbs, a slow, agonizing ballet of muscle and bone protesting the rough treatment. My head, a bruised melon, throbbed with a dull, insistent rhythm. The last thing I remembered was the flash, the blinding white that swallowed everything. Now, darkness. Not the comforting shroud of sleep, but a thick, suffocating blanket. A low groan escaped my lips. The floor beneath me was rough, cold steel. I shifted, my hands finding the gritty texture. Splinters of memory pricked at the edges of my awareness, the alley, the glint of metal, the sneering face I couldn't quite recall. I pushed myself up, a wave of nausea rolling through me. My eyes, slow to adjust, began to make out shapes in the gloom. The skeletal ribs of the ship's structure loomed overhead, a cage of iron. The air was thick with the scent of the sea, but beneath it, that metallic tang persisted, sharper now. Blood, my blood. I touched my temple, my fingers coming away slick and crimson. A deep gash, no doubt. My gaze swept the cavernous space. This was the cargo ship hold, 3 days from port. A place designed for anonymity, for the silent transit of goods. But something else had been in transit here. Something violent. I stumbled forward, my legs still shaky. My mind, however, was already sifting through the debris of my recent past. The heists, the signature. He hadn't been caught. I hadn't caught him. And now here I was waking up in the belly of a vessel, a victim. This wasn't random. This was a message. A low hum vibrated through the deck, the thrum of the ship's engines a constant reminder of our isolation. Miles of unforgiving ocean separating me from any semblance of order. And the butcher, or whoever wore his mask, was playing a new game. My stomach churned. I forced myself to approach, each step a deliberate act of defiance against the fear that threatened to paralyze me. The stain was indeed blood, and it wasn't just a smear. It was a pattern. The butcher's victims, they were always found, arranged, a macabre tableau. This stain, it was too deliberate, too precise. Not a chaotic struggle, but a calculated display. I knelt, my injured head protesting with a sharp stab of pain. My fingers traced the edge of the stain. It was still tacky, fresh. How long had I been out? Who had done this? And why leave me alive? My head snapped up, every nerve on high alert. I strained my ears, my breath held tight in my chest. Nothing, just the groan of the ship, the sigh of the sea against the hull. There was I seeing things. There was the blow to my head playing tricks on me. I pushed the thought away. No, this was real, the arrangement of the blood, the sheer audacity of it. They had taken me, brought me here, and left me with this. This calling card. It looked out of place, incongruous against the industrial grit. I reached for it, my fingers trembling slightly. It was a small, tarnished silver locket. My breath caught in my throat. I knew this locket. It belonged to... A sudden, sharp memory flashed. Unbidden and brutal, her name. He was the final victim, the one I never solved, the one that had broken me. The blood in the locket's locket was a tiny, faded photograph. It was her, and beneath it, etched into the silver, a single, familiar symbol. A twisted knot, the butcher's mark. My mind reeled. This wasn't just a taunt. This was a desecration. They hadn't just replicated the butcher's methods. They had brought his legacy, his trophy, to me, to this place. A primal rage, hot and searing, began to burn through the fog of pain. This wasn't about justice anymore. It wasn't about redemption. It was about something far more visceral, far more personal. It was about the ghosts I'd tried to bury, the faces I couldn't forget, and the promise I'd broken. The stakes had just been raised. They had been raised by a phantom from my own personal hell, a phantom who knew exactly where to strike. And I was trapped in his arena, the cargo ship hold, 3 days from port with no escape and only the echoes of my failures for company. The air in the cargo ship hold, 3 days from port, was thick, a soupy stew of brine and diesel. My lungs protested each shallow breath, a familiar ache settling deep in my chest. It was a damp, metallic smell, the kind that clung to everything: my coat, my skin, the very fabric of my resolve. I'd chosen this place, this suffocating darkness, with a grim kind of hope. A gamble, really. But then everything had become a gamble since her. Since the locket. The beam of my flashlight cut through the gloom, dancing over stacked crates, their labels faded into illegibility. Each shadow seemed to stretch, to writhe, playing tricks on my eyes. I kept my movements slow, deliberate, my senses stretched taut like piano wire. The creak of the ship's hull was a constant, unnerving murmur beneath the drone of the engines, a lullaby of impending doom. I imagined him here, moving with that same unnerving grace, that meticulous precision I'd seen in the ghost of the evidence. He'd orchestrated this whole charade, drawing me out, playing his twisted game of cat and mouse. And I, the disgraced detective, the broken man, was walking right into it. My gloved fingers traced the rough grain of a wooden pallet. It was the same type of wood I remembered from the scene of the third disappearance. Not a detail to be overlooked, not by him. He was a creature of habit, a collector of signatures, and that's what this was, wasn't it? A deliberate, taunting echo of the past, designed to draw me in, to make me relive the failures, the faces I couldn't save. But this time I wouldn't be the one led blind. This time I was the bait. The plan was simple, born from late nights fueled by stale coffee and the gnawing emptiness that had become my constant companion. I'd leaked information, a carefully constructed trail of breadcrumbs leading to this isolated corner of the world. A rumor of a particular shipment, something that would pique his interest, something that would resonate with the same warped logic that had driven him before. He craved recognition, not the kind that came with headlines, but the kind that came from a single, knowing nod. The kind that said, "I see I understand my art." A faint, scraping sound, distant but distinct, snagged my attention. My heart, that traitorous organ, gave a little jolt. I extinguished the flashlight, plunging myself into absolute black. I pressed myself against a cold metal bulkhead, the chill seeping through my jacket, grounding me. My breath hitched, then steadied. Patience. That was the key. He wouldn't rush. He never rushed. He savored the anticipation, the slow build of tension, the moment before the curtain fell. Minutes bled into an eternity. The air seemed to vibrate with an unseen presence. I strained my ears, cataloging every minute shift in the ship's groans, every distant clang. There was that a footstep? A muffled cough, I had to be sure. Doubts were a luxury I could no longer afford. Then a faint beam of light, softer than mine, flickered at the edge of my vision. It moved with a deliberate, almost fluid motion, illuminating the narrow aisles between the crates. It was him, or at least someone playing his part. The tension in my shoulders coiled tighter, a spring wound to its breaking point. I stayed perfectly still, my eyes fixed on the shifting light. It approached slow and steady. He was close, closer than I'd anticipated, too close. Her name, the blood in the locket. My focus snapped back to the present. The light paused, then began to move again, heading towards the very spot where I was concealed. He was searching, not for a target, not yet. He was assessing, making sure the trap was set correctly, that his audience was in place. He enjoyed the performance. I could feel the sweat prickling my palms. This was it, the moment of truth. I'd drawn him here into this concrete tomb, this floating prison. Now I just had to hold my nerve. The trap was set. The beam of the flashlight, a single probing eye, swept across the corrugated metal of the cargo containers. Each pass grew bolder, closer. I pressed myself deeper into the shadows, the rough weave of the burlap sack scratching at my cheek. The air in the cargo ship hold, 3 days from port, was thick with the stench of brine and something metallic, a coppery tang that always made my teeth ache. He knew I was here. The pause, the deliberate way the light had stuttered before resuming its search, it was a calculated move. A game. He always did enjoy the performance. My breath hitched, a shallow, ragged sound lost in the groaning timbers of the ship. Years. It had been years since I'd last felt this coiled tension, this raw anticipation of violence. The ghost of the past, the one I'd tried to bury beneath layers of cheap whiskey and self-recrimination, was stirring. His methods, so precise, so utterly theatrical, had brought me back to this, back to the edge of the abyss. The light's sweep broadened, then stopped, directly ahead of me. A silhouette detached itself from the stacked crates, the architect of the chaos, the phantom I'd chased for so long. "You came." A voice rasped like dry leaves skittering across concrete. It was the voice from the recordings, the one that had haunted my dreams. "I knew you would, Cole," the prodigal detective, returning to the scene of his greatest failure. My knuckles were white where I gripped the rusted pipe I'd found earlier tucked between 2 crates. It felt inadequate, a child's toy against the power radiating from him. "It ends tonight," I said, my voice a low growl, surprisingly steady. He chuckled, a sound devoid of mirth. "Ends? Oh, my dear Cole, it's only just beginning. This is a prelude, a grand opening act for an audience of one." He gestured with a gloved hand, and a second beam of light flickered on, illuminating a large, canvas-covered shape in the center of the hold. "What is that?" I demanded, my muscles tensing. "A testament," he replied, his voice dripping with self-importance. "A monument to the broken pieces you left behind, to the lives you couldn't save." The light shifted, and he began to walk, not towards me, but around the covered object. Each step was measured, deliberate, like a conductor leading an orchestra. Remember the tailor, Cole, the meticulous stitches, the perfect fit for his victims. Remember the clockmaker, the precise timing, the ticking seconds until their final moment. My mind reeled, the faces of the past flashing behind my eyes. He was reliving them, parading them before me, a twisted gallery of my failures. "You're a monster," I spat. "Am I?" He stopped, his silhouette now framed by the 2 beams of light. "Or am I merely a reflection? You, Cole, you're no different. You crave the chaos, don't you? The adrenaline, the thrill of the chase, even if it's a chase towards your own destruction." He was trying to get inside my head, to unravel the fragile threads of my resolve. But the years of self-loathing had built a fortress around my sanity. I wouldn't let him win this war. "You're wrong," I said, my voice hardening. "I'm here to stop you." Suddenly he lunged, not at me but at the canvas. With a swift, violent tug, he ripped it away. It wasn't a victim. It was a complex, intricate mechanism, all gears and pulleys and gleaming brass, humming with a low, mechanical thrum. And at its heart, suspended by fine wires, was a small, ornate music box. "The final piece," he declared, his voice triumphant. "The crescendo. This will broadcast my masterpiece to the world, Cole. A symphony of fear played out on every frequency, and you, my esteemed colleague, will be my unwitting accomplice." He reached for a lever on the contraption. This was it. The point of no return. I didn't think. I acted. I charged, the pipe a blur in my hand. The clang as the pipe struck the metal was deafening in the enclosed space. Sparks flew. He staggered back, surprise flickering across his face. For the first time, I saw a crack in his composure. He hadn't expected me to be this fast, this desperate. "You fool!" he snarled, drawing a wickedly curved knife from his belt. The blade glinted, catching the light. We circled each other, the humming mechanism between us a ticking clock counting down to something I couldn't yet comprehend. The air crackled with a malevolent energy. He was a dancer, fluid and precise, his movements economical. I was a bull, raw power against his honed skill. He feinted left, then slashed right. I ducked, the wind of the blade whipping past my ear. I swung the pipe, aiming for his legs, but he leaped, impossibly agile, landing with a soft thud. "This is what you were made for, Cole," he taunted, his eyes burning with a feverish intensity. "To be the foil." I parried with the pipe, the impact jarring my arms. The metal shrieked. He pressed, a relentless assault. I felt a searing pain in my side as the knife grazed my jacket, tearing through the fabric. "You're losing your touch, detective," he hissed, pushing me back towards the humming contraption. My foot slipped on something slick on the deck. I stumbled, my back hitting the cold metal of the machine. Gears whirred, and a section of the mechanism spun faster. A sudden, sickening realization dawned. This wasn't just about the music box. It was a trap designed for me. His face contorted in a triumphant grin. "Did I truly think it was about the heists, Cole? Those were merely the overture. This," he gestured to the spinning gears, "this is the grand finale, and I, my dear Cole, are about to become the star." The clang of metal against metal echoed in the cavernous cargo ship hold 3 days from port. His words, a venomous whisper, scraped against my raw nerves. "You're losing your touch, detective." He pressed, a relentless assault, and I felt a searing pain in my side as the knife grazed my jacket, tearing through the fabric. I parried with the pipe, the impact jarring my arms, the metal shrieked. He lunged again, the knife a silver streak. My vision blurred, not from the blow, but from the sweat stinging my eyes. Years of dust, of regret, of sleepless nights spent tracing phantom patterns, all coalescing into this grimy, suffocating space. He was good, too good. The ghost I'd chased for so long, wearing a different face, a different name, but the same chilling precision. It was him. He pushed, a brutal shove that sent me stumbling back against a stack of crates. The wood splintered under my weight. My breath hitched, a ragged sound in the vast emptiness. I tasted copper. Not just from the graze, but from a deep internal bleed, a wound I'd carried for years. "You always were too predictable, Cole," he sneered, his voice low and gravelly, like stones grinding together. I gripped the pipe tighter, gripped tight. Predictable? Maybe, but I was also stubborn. I'd learned from my mistakes, from the ones I'd let slip through my fingers. This wasn't just about the heists anymore. It was about the faces of the victims, the empty chairs at their empty tables. It was about redemption, a concept I'd long since relegated to the realm of fairy tales. He lunged again, a blur of motion. This time I was ready. I didn't try to parry. Instead, I dropped, the pipe whistling over my head. I rolled, coming up on one knee, and swept the pipe low, catching him behind the ankles. He yelped, a surprised, almost comical sound, and pitched forward. The knife clattered against the concrete floor. He scrambled, reaching for the weapon, but I was faster. I brought the pipe down, not with full force, but enough to stun. It landed on his shoulder with a sickening thud. He cried out, a sharp gasp of pain. He tried to rise, but his movements were sluggish, his left arm hanging uselessly. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice hoarse. The question hung in the air, heavy with the weight of my long pursuit. This was the moment. The truth laid bare in the belly of a ship adrift at sea. He coughed, a wet, rattling sound. "You know who I am. Detective, you just never wanted to admit it." He pushed himself up, leaning heavily against a crate. His face, now clearer in the faint light, was a mask of pain and something else. A grim satisfaction. "That's why you're so good at finding me." He was right. The obsession, the relentless drive, the willingness to bend the rules, even break them, it was a mirror. I'd refused to acknowledge it, burying it deep beneath layers of guilt and self-recrimination. "The others," I rasped, my gaze fixed on his face. "The ones before, they weren't you." He gave a weak, humorless laugh. "No, they were the practice, the stepping stones. You were always the prize, Cole, the one I needed to break." He winced, clutching his arm. "But you never broke, did you? Just bent, and now here we are." I lowered the pipe, my arms trembling. The fight drained out of me, replaced by a profound weariness. The ghost was real, and it was me. Footsteps echoed from the ship's upper decks, growing louder. The authorities, they'd found us. The case was closed. He looked at me, his eyes holding a strange mixture of animosity and understanding. "Go on, Cole, tell them, be the hero. It's what you always wanted, isn't it?" I didn't answer. The truth had been revealed, not in a dramatic confession, but in a quiet, devastating understanding. I had caught him. But in doing so, I had finally caught a glimpse of myself, a self I wasn't sure I could live with. The cargo ship hold, 3 days from port, had become my confessional, and the absolution I sought was nowhere in sight.